heard the word badass a number of times today, and I hope someone's taking a tally. I took a group of Archer girls to hear a female venture capitalist once, and I was talking with the keynote speaker in the green room before she went on, and she said, so if you were to sum up what the mission of the Archer School for Girls is, what would it be? And off the cuff, I said, well, be a badass. And she got up on stage, and I sat with the girls, and she looked over to us and said, welcome to all the girls from the Archer School for Girls, where the motto is, be a badass. And there were hundreds of people in the audience, and all the girls looked at me. And the girl sitting directly next to me said, is that really our motto? And I said, it is now. You know, if this election has given us anything, as someone mentioned earlier, it has given us the first female nominee of a major party. But it's also given our country an opportunity to have a conversation about how we treat men and women differently when they seek positions of power or even when they speak. These are my parents, Lillian and Antonio, and my father's family emigrated from Italy, and he graduated from high school in the United States. My mom was born 5 years after the 19th Amendment was passed, when women got the right to vote. Her family came down from Quebec to work in the shoe mills in Lowell, Massachusetts. She grew up during the Great Depression, and so she left school in the 8th grade to help her family survive. Now, back in the 60s, the 50s, the 60s, a woman who didn't work often depended on an allowance from her husband. And indeed, my mom got a weekly allowance from my father. And, you know, you could say my mom was educationally disadvantaged, but what I really observed was that she was economically disadvantaged. But she was a really clever woman and had a number of ways of circumventing the system. So, for example, when she went grocery shopping every week, she would trade grocery receipts with the woman who went with her. She had a friend. And then she would pocket the difference. Now, so this brings me to the first piece of advice that my mother gave frequently, which is always have your own money. Mm-hmm. Now, as the years went on, my mother became a little bolder in her methods. And I remember there was a time where she really wanted an in-ground swimming pool at the house. This was like a dream that she had. And my father was not on board with this. But one day I came home from school, and I came around the house, and in the backyard was a backhoe and a huge hole in the ground. Now, I'm not sure if there was forgery involved in that transaction or what, but at the time, you could not buy anything on credit or even execute a contract without your husband's signature. Now, I'm sure my mother would not, well, I'm not sure, but I never heard my mother refer to herself as a feminist. But in thinking back on her life, I know that's exactly who she was, because the second piece of advice she gave me most often was, never get pregnant before you want to, which was good advice. Now, my family was decidedly working class. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, though, and it was a place where many researchers and professors who worked in the universities in and around Boston made their home. So the result was that the public schools were incredibly good, and the intellectual climate was incredibly strong and powerful. And I knew, even while I was in the midst of my education, that that was my ticket out. So I knew I wanted to become a teacher. And when I graduated from college, my first job was at the Emma Willard School, which is an all-girls school, day and boarding, in upstate New York. It's one of the oldest girls' schools in the country. And just to give you a flavor of the school's heritage, suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton is a graduate of Emma Willard. Now, I was extremely skeptical of girls' schools, as was much of the country, because girls' schools all over the land were closing their doors or merging with boys' schools. And to me, having gone K-12 in co-ed public schools, I thought this has to be irrelevant. But truth to be told, it was a tough economy, and it was the only job offer I got. So there I am. I'm at M.A. Willard. I'm teaching. I'm coaching. I'm living in the dormitories. And I am noticing something really kind of extraordinary about the girls who go to school there. First of all, they're not worried about what they look like every day. They're getting up, they're throwing on a uniform, they're not brushing their hair, and they feel incredibly comfortable in their own skin. The other thing I notice is how confident they are and how unafraid they are to speak up when they have something to say. Now, while I'm at M.A. Willard, a woman named Dr. Carol Gilligan, who is a professor of psychology at Harvard University, is doing some research that's never been done before. She's beginning to quantify and articulate the benefits of a single-sex environment. Now, just to help illustrate what Dr. Gilligan discovered, I'm going to give you a little quiz. Does anyone here know who the first female Secretary of State in the United States was? Madeleine Albright. And there she is in all her glory. How about the second female Secretary of State? Condoleezza Rice. Thank you. And of course, the third female Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, when I do a version of this presentation for young women students, and I ask them the question, so what do all these women have in common? They say, they went to the Archer School for Girls. And I say, yes, they did. They went to the Archer School for Girls. It's really remarkable when you consider that less than 5% of women in this country attended a women's institution. And yet girls' schools and women's college graduates have made up to 25% of the female members of Congress, a third of female Fortune 500 board members, and 67% of the heads of state in the world who are women are girls' school or women's college graduates. This is an ad from a girls' school in Toronto, Canada called the Bishop Strawn School. And those of you who can read the caption are laughing because it says, "Send your daughter to Bishop Strawn. The world needs her." What this ad speaks to is that men still run the world. Of 195 heads of state, only 9 are women. Of corporate America's CEOs, only 15% are women. US Congress, only 20% are women. Right here in LA, out of 25 council member seats, only 1 is held by a woman. Even though over 70% of the people who work in our schools are women, they account for only 30% of the heads and principals. Which is why when I had a choice to become the head of a co-ed school or a girls' school, I knew it was my best shot to change the trajectory for our daughters if I worked in a girls' school. So the question becomes, why is this? Women have surpassed men in educational attainment at every level, and yet we are stalled out at high-level leadership. Well, in the 1970s, when the landmark legislation, Title IX, was passed, this was the legislation that said girls should have equal access to educational resources. One of its principal authors and a researcher named Dr. Bernice Sandler coined the phrase, the chilly climate. And the chilly climate refers to the fact that in co-ed settings, or board meetings, or business meetings, we call on men more, we interrupt them less, and we give them more praise for what they say. And over a lifetime, this has a cumulative impact on a girl's or a woman's confidence. And the reason that's so devastating is that confidence governs what we choose to do in life. course, Sheryl Sandberg has written a whole book about this called Lean In, this concept of the confidence gap. For me, as an educator and as the mother of 2 daughters, the central question becomes, how do we inoculate our daughters against the chilly climate? LeanIn.org launched a campaign over the summer called #LeanInTogether, which is exactly what all of you are doing here today. It's really attacking the myth that women are natural enemies. It's attacking the myth of the catty woman, which in my opinion is a Hollywood construct. And it's urging us all to give each other a hand up as women. So Archer decided this would be a good campaign for us to join in on, and we did a photo shoot with the girls. And an interesting thing happened while we were doing the shoot. The photographer asked the girls, stand with your arms crossed and look fierce. And we were having a really hard time. They were all smiling, and like we said, don't smile. And I turned around and I said, what's the problem? And a girl, 12 years old, who was going into 7th grade said, I'm afraid if I don't smile, people will think I'm angry. And my heart sunk, because we know this from the research. We know that even girls as young as 3 and 4 have already gotten the message that we have a responsibility to the rest of the world to be pleasing, right? And to not ever make anyone feel uncomfortable. So I said to the girls, well, you know, maybe you should be a little angry, or at least indignant. And I asked them, how many of you watched the Summer Olympics? And they all said, yes, I watched the Summer Olympics. And I said, good, because if you did, then you know the big story of the Olympics is the U.S. women's team. Out of 46 gold medals, the U.S. women came home with 27. And if the United States women's Olympic teams were a country unto themselves, they earned more gold medals than any other country in the world, with the exception of Great Britain, with whom they tied. And I said, however, that's not how they were treated in the media. And I told them about some of what people were picking up on, what people were having a conversation about, which is precisely that when Simone Manuel is the first African-American woman to win a gold medal in the Olympics, she's referred to simply as African-American. Or how about this headline? Phelps ties for silver in 100 fly in big, bold print. And in smaller font underneath, Ledecky sets world record in women's 800 freestyle. And I'm telling the girls all this, and I'm all fired up. I said, how about my personal favorite, girls? BBC reporter interviews Andy Murray and says to him, Mr. Murray, how does it feel to be the first Olympic tennis player to win 2 gold medals in singles? And Andy Murray, God bless his soul, cocks his head and says, you know, I believe Venus and Serena Williams won that title 4 times apiece already. So I said, girls, are you ready to cross your arms? When men seek positions of power, they're regarded instantly as competent and strong. And when women seek positions of power, they're met with contempt, disgust, even moral outrage. And if you don't believe it, just go back and watch the 2016 election season all over again. So the question is, how do we help our girls, and indeed one another, become conscious of the gender bias that we face every single day? And that we will especially face if we seek positions of power. And that's exactly what an all-female environment can do, right? And that's what it should do. And at Archer, we really believe that if our girls don't graduate with a consciousness of the very real gender bias they will encounter, they will internalize it. And that's what we mean by how do we inoculate our girls from the chilly climate. When I talk about the benefits of a single gender environment, there are some pretty predictable questions that I get. So I have people who will say, well, if my daughter spends her education in the utopia that is a girls' school, how will she ever meet or learn to deal with boys? For the most part, biology is on our side, and boys and girls will seek each other out, despite the barriers you may put up. But the research shows us that women who go to girls' schools or women's colleges marry and divorce at exactly the same rate as women who've gone to co-ed schools. The other question I often get, and this is usually from the dads, is what about the real world? How is my daughter ever going to compete in the real world if she surrounds herself with other women all the time? Well, the fact of the matter is, women who've gone to women's institutions score 15 to 22% higher on standardized tests. They are 3 times more likely to major in careers that go against a stereotype threat like engineering, and twice as likely to earn a doctoral degree. There's no evidence that women who go to women's institutions are at a disadvantage. In fact, quite the opposite. A la Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, Hillary Clinton, et cetera. Most of us didn't have the opportunity to attend a girls' school or reap those benefits, and most of us probably won't send our daughters to girls' schools anyway. So what does this mean for the rest of us? Well, I think it means that what we're doing here today gives us the exact same benefit. We have to raise one another's consciousness, because otherwise when we're sitting in those meetings and we are interrupted or we are talked over, we give up. We give up, or we think it's about us, and it's not about us. And one of the things that Oprah Winfrey used to say that I loved was, you're not in it, right? This is about what's around you and not what's in you. And I really believe that the power of a girls' school is in its sisterhood and in its consciousness raising, and it's not too late for the rest of us to do that as well. Thank you.